My topic today about the watering down of the American Eighth Principle to me seems timely because our friends are dealing with overhauling their Article 2 bylaws. And this is something they're supposed to do approximately every 15 years. But there are similarities and there are great differences. So we will talk today a bit about our shared and divergent histories. How did this eighth principle come to be created? In 2013, Dr. Paula Cole-Jones had been doing some anti-racism work for several years, but she felt that there was something lacking in Unitarianism around the issue of racism. And it wasn't due to lack of good intentions, more it was due to a lack of direction and purpose. She worked with another gentleman, another congregant, Bruce Polak Johnson in Philadelphia, and they came up with the wording of a new principle, and it was presented to the UUA as a possible addition to the 7 principles. Before that point, it had already been endorsed by Black Lives of UU, Diverse Revolutionary Ministries, and Allies for Racial Equity. Black Lives gave the reason for supporting the 8th principle as, and I quote, "The new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and criminal justice system replacing the older systems of slavery and Jim Crow laws, police violence against people of color, recent Supreme Court decisions on voting rights and affirmative action, and the election of Donald Trump at that time, with followers, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who openly supported white supremacists, show that the country is moving quickly and dangerously in the wrong direction. UU's need to take a strong leadership to reverse these trends." And we have seen that this climate has continued. We cannot forget the white supremacists who marched in Charlottesville, Virginia, and rammed a young woman who was opposed to them and caused her death. We cannot deny the fact that there's been vote denial all across the United States still going on, gerrymandering of voting districts, hostility, not just in the States, but in Canada against transgendered people and particularly transgendered youth, and state after state banning books and banning the critical race theory. But within the UUA, the 8th principle really did not ever gain widespread traction. And we can see the two right here. Now we look at the Canadian version. About the same time, the CUC had commissioned a report on dismantling racism, a study group that presented their findings in 2019. And one of their recommendations was the adoption of the H principle. And it's quite correct what Sharon says about this was a hot debate all across the country, forums at all sorts of locations. So let's look at these two slides and see what caused the problems. When you look at the American one, it talks about journeying towards spiritual wholeness. Spiritual wholeness was something that Canadians did not really agree with. Did you have to be spiritual in order to be an anti-racist? They felt that that was loaded wording, so that went. Some people will argue that they were very concerned about oppressions in ourselves and our institutions, but that wasn't the part that really bothered them. It was this multicultural, beloved community. That's kind of limiting. We like to use the word beloved community for Unitarian Universalist, but isn't this a broader statement? Aren't most of our principles quite broad statements that go beyond just the beloved community? So those were issues that Canadians had issues with. And when the Americans first presented their 8th principle, they didn't want a single word to be changed, nothing. The Canadians wouldn't go along with that. They said, hey, we're in another country. We're going to do it our way. Does that sound familiar? So when it did pass on that, the 8th principle in Canada passed, which meant this was adopted by every congregation in Canada. The CUC press release indicated, "We celebrate this moment as an act of good faith, an intentional step towards this aspirational future." You may wonder how I'm going to get this back to the eighth principle and what's happening in the States. It's going to be convoluted, but bear with me. So now we come to the UUA. You can take that slide down for the moment. And they empowered an Article 2 commission that spent 2 years revising and amending the bylaws. Now, this study commission was very interesting. Paula Cole-Jones was a member of it, and there were 2 people on that committee that were under 20 years of age of the people that were working on this particular study. I can't even imagine that we would have a study commission like that in Canada, but that's what they had. But they did indicate the following. From the very beginning, our goal was to listen to what Unitarian Universalists from all sectors of our faith communities felt and thought about the current Article 2 and what we should keep, what we should change, and what we should add. We knew we were not writing this for ourselves alone, but for our larger community. We also knew that we would never write something that everyone thought was perfect. Perfection was not the goal. We knew that no matter what we produced, there would be things people wished we had added, things we did not like, and things that people appreciated. What we tried and what we think we succeeded in doing was to create an Article 2 that articulated our faith today and in the near future. But they also recognized that whenever there is a change, and they wrote this, there is a loss, and where there is loss, there is grief. We honor the fact that there is a loss in changing what has become so familiar to us. We are also mindful that we need not lose everything. You may have noticed that many of the words and themes in our current principles remain in the new Article 2, just in a new format. So let's take a look at the next slides. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. So these are what we currently share with the UUA, right? Unitarians, Universalists of America, and the Canadian Unitarian Council. We share all of these, except our edition is the one at the bottom. We also share the same sources. These are the sources that we share from, our living tradition. And these are very familiar to most of us. So what happens in the new world? We end up with a pictorial representation of our faith. Apparently in 2005, a number of people felt that Unitarianism did not emphasize love enough. So they wanted love to be the center. And all of these things are shared values as single words. They have descriptions with them. And you notice in these ones, I'm going to read these aloud. A lot of them are very similar, but they are different. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life, and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality, and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. The next one, for pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. We look at transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity, and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. You know that the word covenant is all the way through this set of documents. Whereas that the other one, it was we affirming covenant, right? All the way down. But according to this, covenant is a verb. It is a pledge. It is a contract that we are making. It usually is in the form also of a noun of being a formal, solemn, binding contract, such as in international law. It could also be a written agreement or promise, a seal between two or more parties. But in this case, it's used really as a verb, a pledge, a contract. There are already two voices on what's been written so far. The pro group says, way to go. You've simplified this. We have a picture. We are centered on love. It's still aspirational, new language for new times. It's no longer a list. The cons, that side says, it's a bloody flower. It's too vague. What happened to our 500 years of UU history? It's all about congregations, not individuals. And we're losing freedom of expression. Those are opinions. And what I have to say that I really like about the UUA is that when you go to their website and look up anything about Article 2, they have tons of resources all about Article 2. And I encourage people to go and have a look at it. They don't just show the side that says, hooray. They show a lot of that, but they also show the side that says, not going for this. In spite of that, though, this proposed draft to make this change to Article 2 was accepted at the General Assembly in Pittsburgh in 2023. It is now going through an amendment process, and some people are concerned that the UUA is moving away from its spiritual roots and moving in an anti-racist direction. The study commission has continued to work on amendments that have been requested, and its letter of October 25th indicated that after the commission finished incorporating amendments, we put our revised version through another round of plain language review. Also, as is customary with potential bylaw amendments, we have had the proposal reviewed by the UUA's legal counsel. And there are still people that are putting in amendments. They have till the end of this month. And in order to do so, they have to have 15 congregations agree to the amendment. 15. But then you have to think in the United States, they have 1,000 congregations. So we may find 15 that have amendments to make to what has already been put in. One of the things that has been very critical in this issue has been this issue, and we've heard, many of us have heard about it, critical race theory. We've gone too much into this critical race theory. And you'll note that it's been banned in a lot of states. It's been banned from books. It's been banned from being taught to people. So what is this dangerous radical critical race theory about? The slide isn't moving. We'll skip that. I may come back to these, I may not. Here we go. Critical race theory is a group of concepts. The idea that race is a sociological rather than biological designation, that racism pervades society, is fostered and perpetuated by our legal system used for examining the relationship between race and laws and legal institutions of the country. This is particularly in the United States. It's not particularly in the United States. It's also an issue in Canada. Critical race theory essentially forces legal scholars to ask questions. For example, why does possession of less expensive drugs carry higher jail sentences than more expensive drugs? Could this have anything to do with the fact that more people of color are in prison? So we're looking at the role of institutionalized systemic theories. And the result is creating racial inequality, and many of them. Other examples that I'll think of right now are these, ones that you may have read about. Ziegler, also on the board of the Sarasota County School Board, instrumental in ushering Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, pushing a Christian agenda in public schools and banning the teaching of critical race theory. There's a lot of theories out there. Why only this one? Book bans have become a part of a movement to undercut the gains from affirmative action. DEI efforts, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, and the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. That was written in the magazine for Black women, Essence, just in October. And Texas has banned the teaching of critical race theory. Many people feel that the UUA is following a policy that follows this theory, and they're not very comfortable with it. They think it's gone amok. We have our friend, if you've been hearing about Dr. Todd Elkoff, the writer of the Gadfly Papers, he wrote 3 inconvenient essays of one pesky minister. And in his book of 2019, he indicated that political correctness has gone overboard. He advocated for the separation of Universalists and Unitarians, and insisted that white supremacy and racism really aren't rational. That's my reading of it, and I have the book, so if anyone wants to borrow it, let me know what your take is on it. But at the time of 1961, when the Unitarians and Universalists actually merged, there were only 3 Universalist congregations in all of Canada, with less than 68 people, and they had Unitarian members among them. They were happy to join the merger. And it should be pointed out that since 2007, there is a group called the Christian Universalist Association that exists worldwide. They left Unitarian Universalism because they want to pursue Universalism with its original roots, but they identify themselves as such with a very kind point of view towards their roots with the UU movement. And if you don't know what Universalism actually refers to, it means that all human beings are worthy of salvation from a loving God. Nobody's left out. And then we go back to that lovely hiring controversy that occurred in 2017. And this is really where the momentum for the principle number 8 came from. It started when a Latina woman, Cristina Rivera, complained about not getting the position that she had applied for over a white male candidate. When she inquired as to why, you do a follow-up appointment, why didn't I get the position? She was told, quote unquote, she wasn't the right fit. And she went public with it, causing a debate about the hiring as an example of white supremacy. The other candidate, Dr. Andy Burnett, refused to take the position because of the embarrassment of being labeled a white supremacist, which was deeply hurtful to him. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. You think this is a dull, just ordinary run-of-the-mill religion? No. We have our own controversies. We have all sorts of skeletons in our closet, if you check historically, and don't think that Unitarianism and Universalism was easily born. Churches came and went. There was lots of fighting. People were murdered. There was a lot of revolutionary thought that happened in Universalism. But was the UUA racist in its hiring practices? Was there an unconscious bias? Well, consider this. This is an article from the Harvard Review by Victor Ray, November 19th of 2019. And he says, just how white are organizations? The simplest way to think about organizational whiteness is through statistics. For example, Black representation at the top of organizational hierarchies, as measured through CEOs in Fortune 500 companies, has decreased from 6 CEOs in 2012 to 3 in 2019. Steady declines in minority representation at the helm of these businesses has been occurring since their peak in the early and mid 2000s, leading some scholars to claim that the heyday of dedicated diversity efforts has ended. University presidents remain mostly white and male. Despite diversifying student demographics, academic hierarchies remain deeply stratified by race, with Black men and women respectively making up just 2% of full-time professors above the rank of assistant. The gold standard for detecting discrimination, which is a meta-analysis of field experiments, has accounted for showing high levels of hiring discrimination against Black men. They've stayed constant since the 1980s. Discrimination against Latinos has decreased little. And despite some progress diversifying within individual firms, between firm segregation has increased over the past 40 years. And Fortune 500 boards remain 83.9% white. Did you ever apply for a job where you were really sure you should have gotten, but you didn't? You ever wondered why? I applied for a job. I was positive I was going to get this job. You know, you have like this gut feeling, yeah, this is the one. And when they called me and told me that I didn't get the offer, I was actually shocked. A week later, I got a phone call and they offered me the position again, but they only wanted me to come in on a trial basis. So I went in to see what was going on and found out that they hired somebody who was blonde, blue-eyed. It turned out the manager wanted to ask her out for a date, but she couldn't do the job. And so they called me and I said to them, well, I'll tell you what, if I like it here, after a week, I'll see if I want to stay. After 2 hours, they came back and asked me to stay and gave me a contract. So these things do happen. And it's very rare that you get the chance to actually see it in action. You know, it's not just an American issue. If you're reading the newspapers, you know that the Ontario Human Rights Commission issued its final report in October 2023 after 6 years of investigation, and they found that anti-Black racism by Toronto police, discrimination, and racial profiling continue to this day. The police department has apologized and says it will work on this. But we do see this backlash, this huge backlash. I wanted to add a further note. I don't want to just leave it and think that what happened to Dr. Andy Burnett and to Christina? Well, Christina had to resign in 2018 from the Board of Trustees following anonymous hate letters threatening her and her family that were left at her congregation. Hate letters. She then worked for the online Church of the Larger Fellowship for UUs, and she also won an award in 2020, the Angus H. McLean Award for Excellence in Religious Education, and she formed her own consulting firm called Called to Justice. Dr. Andy Burnett advocated for LGBTQ youth and adults in an organization called 1 in 10. He continued as a UU minister, speaking from the pulpit up till 2021, and he is currently a Veterans Administration hospital chaplain and a chaplain trainer. And we wish them both well in what they're doing. But these are events that did add to the impetus for Principal Aid. And as a result of that whole hiring kerfuffle that occurred, there was the white supremacy teach-ins that went all across North America. We had one here at Don Heights at the time. And there was a lot of talk about these very issues because entrenched is entrenched. We don't even know. And I wonder how many people here have looked and noticed on their televisions that you see people portrayed in far more diversity in the last 3 years than we ever saw. See if I get the slide right. I put this slide up for here because there was the Standing on the Side of Love campaign. I don't know how many people remember this campaign. It was an American one. And there was a movement to change it to side of love. Many feel that it was clearly a metaphor for being on side with love. How about for this group? Do you think they felt included? They didn't. They didn't. Were they being overly sensitive? Does that really count on your body? So some people spoof this sort of stuff. Oh, the Unitarian Universe, they're too concerned with political correctness. They're too concerned with making changes that aren't necessary. But are they? There are things that are going on behind the scenes. Dr. Elkloff was disfellowshipped by the UUA. This is normally done to ministers who have appropriated funds or been involved in sexual misconduct, and he was neither. He was a minister with a long, distinguished career. I don't have the full information on the other side. I have his information from his book. And what he related was, you may not like what I have to say, but a faith that calls itself free should be free at the pulpit, where a minister can express themselves. Whether the congregation accepts it or not is up to each of them. We are capable of agreeing and disagreeing for ourselves. And he is now president of a new organization called the North American UU organization. That is, at this writing, has a few congregations and some individuals. It's mostly online, following more traditional Unitarian values. Is this rewriting of the UUA Article 2 with its much smaller Principle 8 entrenched going to destroy the Unitarian Universalist movement? With all these splinter groups? I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it won't do any such thing. I belong to another religion. I grew up in Unitarianism. I was given my Bible by a Unitarian congregation in Brooklyn, New York. Never learned how to read it at that point. But when I joined this other faith, I found out eventually that there had been a huge lawsuit, a leadership lawsuit. And in the legal proceedings, one leader was ousted, the other became the church's worldwide leader. The main organization survived, and it continued to flourish. The other leader formed a splinter group, but on a much, much, much smaller scale. I had the pleasure of spending some time reading about Unitarians in Canada in the late Philip Hewitt's detailed history book about it. And we know it's never going to be smooth sailing. It's never going to be perfect. It's going to be tough. But I have no doubt Dr. Sophia Betancourt, the current president of the UUA, its first openly queer woman of color, is in for a challenge and that she's up for the task. This is not an easy faith. This is not an easy faith. But we have always been skeptics and we've always challenged authority. And I don't see that changing even among our own ranks. Some feel the current desire to uproot Article 2 is a disregard for our very deep historical roots of our faith, that's gone too far, that it's too radical. And sometimes when I look at the group that wants to save the 7 principles, yes, they have a group that wants to save the 7 principles, I can't help wishing that they had looked north to Canada and instead supported the 8 principles in the form that ours took. That to me might have been a simple and elegant solution. But I also like that Canada went through its own revolution, its own discussion. It looked at its own research, its own reports, and it listened to Canadians across the country. So let's compare again. Canada passed its own version of the 8th principle in November 2021. The UUA has a rewrite of Article 2 that includes the 8th principle that is entrenched in justice and is up for passage, final passage in 2024. So what happens next? What happens next is final amendments. The UUA board is now receiving amendments to the version submitted by the commission. It has an online process to propose and endorse amendments. And those proposed amendments will need 15 certified congregations to formally endorse it. This ends February 1st. They actually said by midnight, no extensions allowed. And then these amendments will be on the agenda at the next General Assembly in 2024, and they will vote again. Did they water down the eighth principle? I think they did. Do those congregations that already accepted the eighth principle get to keep them in the States? Yes, they do. Did we do the right thing by adopting our own eighth principle? Absolutely, yes. As Rumi said, in every religion there's love, yet love has no religion. Let us go forth and continue to build on what we have.